Every spring, a bird called the barnacle goose migrates from the North Sea coast to the Russian Arctic, where it breeds. That's a 3,000-kilometer trip. Along the way, the geese usually take pit stops to rest and refuel. But the Arctic spring has been arriving earlier and earlier. So researchers analyzed 6 years of barnacle goose migratory tracking data to try to figure out if these geese, and other species like it, can adapt their migration to stay in sync with the changing seasons.
And then we used satellite images to see when snow was melting in the Arctic, and then we could relate the timing of the birds to the snow melt.
Bart Nolet, an ecologist at the University of Amsterdam. Nolet and his colleagues found that the geese did not leave their wintering grounds sooner to match the earlier Arctic spring, but they did speed up their trip by skipping many of their usual stopovers.
The more we learn about Neanderthals, the more like us they become. They made jewelry from shells and eagle talons. They probably painted cave art. They may have buried their dead as well. And now some archaeologists say evidence is mounting for yet another skill the Neanderthals might have shared: the ability to navigate the seas.
And maybe that's just part of the human psyche of wanting to go and explore places, and maybe that extends back further than we would have thought.
Alan Simmons of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He presented his case at a meeting of the Society for American Archaeology in Washington, D.C., first reported on in an article by journalist Andrew Lawler in the journal Science. "39 years ago, Voyager 1 swung by Jupiter on its journey to interstellar space. And as it did, it picked up spooky, low-frequency radio signals like this. The whistlers, as they're known, were radio broadcasts from unusual natural antennas, lightning bolts, which act like radio transmitters with current moving through a channel. Along with photos of the dark side of the planet, the whistlers confirmed the existence of lightning on Jupiter, but the limited observations made it hard to pin down where electrical storms gathered, and the bolts were thought to be rare compared to Earth. Now the Juno spacecraft has detected the first high-frequency radio signals and 1,600 new whistlers, which together suggest lightning on Jupiter is much more common than scientists thought. Every year, 20 million tons of salt are dumped on roads and highways across the U.S. to eliminate ice, and airlines spray up to 1,000 gallons of antifreeze on any one plane to de-ice it. But now scientists have come up with what might be a more environmentally friendly alternative.
We've often heard the expression, it's time to fight fire with fire. Well, I think now it's time to fight ice with ice.
Jonathan Barrico studies fluid mechanics at Virginia Tech. And what he means by that is if ice growth is inevitable, why not design certain areas of plane wings or roads or HVAC systems specifically to attract ice, to control the chaos and keep ice-forming moisture away from the rest of the surface.
Those structures have got to be able to understand the environment and be safe. And so they're going to have to withstand whatever Marsquake environment is actually there. We will know what that is. We will know if it's difficult or whether it's relatively easy, but we'll be able to accommodate it no matter what. Now, another experiment is a heat probe. This also sits on the surface and it pounds into the ground about 5 meters a set of thermistors that will measure the heat, and that will tell us how Mars is cooling off. You know, all our planets are built, 4.5 billion years ago. They're still cooling off from their initial accretion.
Large companies need a way to reach the savings of the public at large. The same problem, on a smaller scale, faces practically every company trying to develop new products and create new jobs. There can be little prospect of raising the sort of sums needed from friends and people we know, and while banks may agree to provide short-term finance, they are generally unwilling to provide money on a permanent basis for long-term projects. So companies turn to the public, inviting people to lend them money or take a share in the business in exchange for a share in future profits. They do this by issuing stocks and shares in the business through the stock exchange. To avoid being confronted by costly demands, an exporter should try to determine the buyer's real interest in the product from the outset. This can be ascertained through appropriate questions, but must also be based on research and other preparations before the negotiations. Only then can a suitable counter-proposal be presented. To achieve a favorable outcome from the negotiations, an exporter should draw up a plan of action beforehand, which addresses a few key issues. Experienced negotiators consider that as much as 80% of their overall time devoted to negotiations should go to such preparations. The preliminary work should be aimed at obtaining relevant information on the target market and the buyers of the product. It should also include developing counter-proposals if objections are raised on any of the exporter's opening negotiating points. Negotiations work wonders. This is particularly so in international business, since it is mostly through negotiations that exporters and importers bridge their differences and reach a fair and mutually satisfactory deal. By presenting a more comprehensive negotiating package in a well-planned and organized manner, exporters should be able to improve the effectiveness of their business discussions, and in the long term, the profitability of their export operations.
It's difficult to imagine the sea ever running out of fish. It's so vast, so deep, so mysterious. Unfortunately, it's not bottomless. Overfishing, coupled with destructive fishing practices, is killing off the fish and ruining their environment. Destroy the fish, and you destroy the fisherman's means of living. At least 60% of the world's commercially important fish species are already overfished or fished to the limit. As a result, governments have had to close down some areas of sea to commercial fishing.
It is commonly held that drinking moderate amounts of alcohol can reduce the odds of having a deadly heart attack. More noteworthy benefits to the heart have occurred when people had 3 to 7 drinks per day, but doctors advise against that because heavy drinking is associated with a host of problems. It can be liver damages or impaired fertility. Dr. Pekka Karhunen of the University of Tampere in Finland said that previous reports that 1 or 2 alcoholic drinks per day could help fend off heart disease appeared to have been overestimated.
In the humanities, authors write to inform you in many ways. These methods can be classified into 3 types of informational writing: factual, descriptive, and process. Factual writing provides background information on an author, composer, or artist, or on a type of music, literature, or art. Examples of factual writing include notes on a book jacket, or album cover and longer pieces, such as an article describing a style of music, which you might read in a music appreciation course. This kind of writing provides a context for your study of the humanities.
Have you ever wanted to travel back through time and see what life was like at the dawn of man? Well, museums can make history come alive. And one museum in particular can take you on a thrilling journey from the beginning of human culture to the present day. It is the British Museum. Being one of the largest museums in the world, it is home to over 7 million objects from the world's continents. While most of us may not have the opportunity to visit London, we can catch a glimpse of the treasures it holds in Beijing. From March 10th till June 10th, more than 100 cultural relics will be on display in the Palace Museum.
A man steps on what seems like solid ground, but discovers with horror that the ground is giving way beneath his feet. The man struggles desperately, but he is mercilessly trapped. He cannot escape. Slowly he sinks deeper and deeper until at last he is gone, buried in the treacherous earth. The solid ground was solid only in appearance. It was actually quicksand, which is a deep mass of fine sand mixed with water. How is quicksand formed? Water pushes up from below the surface and is held by the sand. The grains of sand are forced apart by the water. They cannot hold any weight. The subsurface water may have come from a spring, a river, or a stream.
New technology links the world as never before. Our planet has shrunk. It's now a global village where countries are only seconds away by fax or phone or satellite link. And, of course, our ability to benefit from this high-tech communications equipment is greatly enhanced by foreign language skills. Deeply involved with this new technology is a breed of modern business people who have a growing respect for the economic value of doing business abroad. In modern markets, success overseas often helps support domestic business efforts.
Most volcanoes are quiet. They rest peacefully for hundreds of years. No one pays much attention to them. Mount St. Helens was one of these volcanoes. Until 1980, it was a beautiful recreation area. Its last eruption had been 123 years ago. No one was worried about another one. In March 1980, Mount St. Helens began to make noises. At first, there were some shaking movements. Then, small eruptions occurred. Some residents left immediately. Others felt there was no danger. But on the morning of May 18, 1980, the mountain blew its top. With the power of 25 atomic bombs, Mount St. Helens exploded.
Radiation is the greatest known danger to explorers in space. The unit of radiation is called rem. Scientists have reason to think that a man can put up with far more radiation than 0.1 rem without being damaged. The figure of 60 rems has been agreed on. The trouble is that it is extremely difficult to be sure about radiation damage. A person may feel perfectly well, but the cells of his or her sex organs may be damaged, and this will not be discovered until the birth of deformed children or even grandchildren. Missions of the Apollo flights have had to cross belts of high amounts of rems. So far, no dangerous amounts of radiation have been reported, but the Apollo missions have been quite short. We simply do not know yet how men are going to get on when they spend weeks and months outside the protection of the atmosphere, working in a space laboratory. Drugs might help to decrease the damage done by radiation, but no really effective ones have been found so far. Space is a dangerous place, not only because of meteors, but also because of rays from the sun and other stars. The atmosphere again acts as our protective blanket on Earth. Light gets through, and this is essential for plants to make the food which we eat. Heat, too, makes our environment endurable. Various kinds of rays come through the air from outer space, but enormous quantities of radiation from the sun are screened off. As soon as men leave the atmosphere, they are exposed to this radiation, and their spacesuits, or the walls of their spacecraft, if they are inside, do prevent a lot of radiation damage.
Blogging is a pastime for many, even a livelihood for a few. For some, it becomes an obsession. Such bloggers often feel compelled to write several times daily and feel uneasy if they don't keep up. As they spend more time leaning over their computers, they neglect family, friends, and jobs. They blog at home, at work, and on the road. They blog openly or sometimes quietly so as not to call attention to their habit. The number of bloggers has grown quickly, thanks to sites like Blogger.com, which makes it easy to set up a blog. Technorati, a blog tracking service, has counted some 2.5 million blogs. Of course, most of those millions are abandoned or, at best, maintained infrequently. For many bloggers, the novelty soon wears off and their persistence fades. Sometimes, too, the realization that no one is reading sets in.
Around 120 years ago, Ebbinghaus began his study of memory. He concentrated on studying how quickly the human mind can remember information. One result of his research is known as the total time hypothesis, which simply means the amount you learn depends on the time you spend trying to learn it. This can be taken as our first rule of learning. Although it is usually true that studying for 4 hours is better than studying for 1, there is still the question of how we should use the 4 hours. For example, is it better to study for 4 hours straight, or to study for 1 hour a day for 4 days in a row? The answer, as you may have suspected, is that it is better to spread out the study times. This phenomenon, through which we can learn more efficiently by dividing our practice time, is known as the distribution of practice effect.